This morning we hear fresh claims that police forces in England and Wales are routinely manipulating crime figures in order to meet targets by using techniques such as cuffing, nodding, skewing and stitching. Cuffing is when officers record multiple incidents in the same area as one single crime, or record thefts as lost property, burglaries as theft from property, and attempted burglaries as criminal damage. Nodding is when an offender admits a number of offences in return for being charged with less serious offences. Skewing is when forces put more resources into areas which are measured by performance indicators than in areas which aren't. And stitching, which whistleblowers say is now less prevalent than it used to be, is when a false confession is obtained from a suspect. This morning, MPs are questioning various criminologists and later a chief constable about how common these practices are. It's after several police whistleblowers made claims to the same group of MPs last month. Here are some extracts from that evidence.
In the Met, they use to do so an offence called theft snatch, which doesn't actually exist. It isn't recognised by the Home Office. It's a convenient way of effectively getting a robbery off the books, but not putting it into the theft from person bracket. It was a non-existent type of crime. And this would happen even in clear cases where there was CCTV showing a robbery taking place. They were showing on some reports, which were very swiftly removed, a 400% increase in street robberies. If you were to look at the same reports a couple of days later, robberies would be static, but theft snatch would have increased by a large amount. I discussed this with some of the analysts at the Met, and they highlighted to me that they'd been aware of this problem for some time, and they'd actually performed some audit reports and found that as many as 300 burglaries would disappear within a couple of week period. I then was put into another specialist role, this time with serious crime and operations, and working on the crime fighters team, which effectively once a month gathers together the headline performance data for specialist crime and operations at a very senior level. As part and parcel of that, in July, I did some analysis around serious sexual offences and rape. In the course of doing that, I found that no crimes, which is a way effectively of establishing that a report is no longer a crime to be investigated, were incorrect in about 80% of cases. These are the words from the horse's mouth. These are something which I recorded in a conversation with the crime management unit themselves. These are not my words. They went on to say that in part the problem is ignorance of the counting rules, and also in the Metropolitan Police, and this is a side note which came up later, that tendentially they are working to the charging standards, which is well beyond the remit of actually what we're there to do. We don't do deciding guilt. That's court. That's the justice system. We gather evidence and put it before the justice system. So effectively we're usurping that in some way by preempting it with our own decisions based on those standards, which is inappropriate. It appears to be the perception that serious sexual offences being undetected is a dirty word. So the preference has developed to try and justify no crime on the basis of mental health or similar issues of vulnerability, or by saying that the victim has refused to go on to disclose to them.
I am truly shocked by what I have read. Shocked for two reasons. Shocked that apparently such manipulation of police statistics could possibly happen on such a wide scale and become so institutionally prevalent. And shocked that we have known about it for such a long time and so little has changed as a result of that public knowledge of this problem.
Well, the last voice you heard there was Bernard Jenkin, the chair of the Commons Public Administration Committee. And you also heard from a whistleblower called James Patrick. He's a Metropolitan Police constable. He's facing disciplinary action now from the Met, and he's told us he may be subject to further action if he raises the issue again, especially with journalists. The latest crime figures, by the way, for England and Wales, covering the year ending March 2013, show that crime has fallen by 7% compared to the previous year. Overall levels of crime have been falling since the mid-90s. And often when we report the latest crime figures on this programme, some of you get in touch to tell us you simply do not believe that crime is falling. So potentially, could this be why? Keen to hear from you this morning, particularly if you've had your crime downgraded or you've been encouraged not to pursue what may have happened to you. 0500 909 693. Danny Shaw is our Home Affairs correspondent. He's been looking into this for 5 Live, and also you've just been listening to the evidence being given this morning. MPs are questioning criminologists and have been for the last 20 minutes or so. What have they been saying about crime figures?
Well, the two criminologists are experts in terms of crime stats, Professor Mike Hough and Professor Stephen Shute. And they've been saying that really, historically, there was always a problem of crimes that were reported to police not being recorded by police. So someone comes and reports a crime, but it doesn't make its way into the official statistics. Now, in the 80s and 90s, Mike Hough said around 50 to 60% of reported crimes ended up in the stats. That increased by the period of about a decade ago, the early 2000s, to about 90%, because the way in which police counted crimes changed fundamentally. But since 2007, 2008, that has slipped back to around 70%. So what we appear to be dealing with here is a problem in the last 5 or 6 years in which fewer crimes reported to police are being recorded by police. Now, there are 3 possible reasons that Mike Hough put forward, and he really is an expert in this. One, willful breaking of the rules, which some of the examples that we've heard about there. Secondly, police officers using more discretion. They have been encouraged, particularly by this government, to not record every single minor incident, but to deal with things perhaps on the street as they see fit. And obviously these don't get their way into the official statistics. And thirdly, a misunderstanding of the rules. Police officers acting in good faith, but simply misinterpreting what they believe is the appropriate way to record crimes.
Can you give us some more examples of how officers are alleged to massage the figures?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about a willful misrecording of the crime stats or a misinterpretation, perhaps, here's an example. There's 7 cars, let's say, are broken into at a multi-storey car park. And there's clear evidence that the thieves have somehow breached the car park security, got in somehow. That might be recorded rather than 7 car break-ins as one criminal damage or one break into a multi-storey car park. Possibly that's the kind of thing. We see, particularly with sexual offences, some police forces have very high rates of no crime. So someone reports an allegation of a sexual offence, but somewhere in that police force, someone decides, well, actually no crime actually occurred, so it never really makes its way into the official statistics. Now, that could be because the victim has withdrawn their testimony. It could be because the police decide that the victim's unreliable. What the Metropolitan Police is doing, partly as a result of the concerns raised by James Patrick, is they are conducting a review of the past 2 years of the way that rapes and other sexual offences have been recorded. And they are getting away from targets on detections in terms of sexual offences, which could encourage people to record fewer crimes in order to boost detection rates. They're going to stop doing that, and instead they're going to try and look at sort of numerical numbers of detections rather than proportions. People can understand that. So I think the Met is sort of acknowledging that there may have been a problem there, which is why they're taking those steps.
And the evidence for either willful breaking or misunderstanding comes from these whistleblowers, does it?
Well, the whistleblowers have certainly provided some sort of on-the-ground evidence, if you like, particularly James Patrick. I think there was another former officer called Roger Patrick, an ex-West Midlands officer, who gave evidence to the committee at the same time. His concerns go back, I think, some years and have been aired before, but certainly James Patrick is new. But let's just go back to earlier this year in January. The Office for National Statistics, which is responsible for publishing crime data these days, actually produced a report and said that the fall in offences recorded by police over the last few years may have been exaggerated. They said that police records of crime have showed a reduction of 960,000 offences. That's almost 1 million offences in England and Wales over the last 5 years, while the survey, which measures people's experiences of crime, has shown a reduction of 560,000 offences. So they could see that there was something happening here, that the fall in crime recorded by police was being exaggerated, and they said the target culture could be to blame, whereby police are coming under pressure to reduce offending. Targets have been set, and therefore some of these techniques that we've outlined earlier are being deployed in order to reduce crimes. So it's not just the whistleblowers, but it's also official reports that are saying there's a problem.
And what do the police say? We'll hear from the Met in a moment, but generally, what do they say?
Well, it's quite interesting because recently at the Association of Chief Police Officers conference, the Chief Constable of Derbyshire Police, Mick Creedon, raised this whole issue of targets and the pressures that were being brought to bear on officers further down to skew the stats in some way. And I asked some other Chief Constables, was that their experience? And most of them said, no, it was not. And they didn't recognise the concerns that he was addressing. And many of them said, we are inspected so much. Our crime stats are audited so regularly, much more than before, that they had confidence in the figures. And certainly, some of them acknowledge there may be some problems in some forces, and Kent Police has been hauled over the coals earlier this year for the way it recorded its crime stats. But most of them say, in general, we're getting it right the majority of the time.
OK, thank you very much. Danny Shaw, our Home Affairs correspondent. Chris Hobbs is a former Metropolitan Police officer and provided written evidence to the committee that's sitting again this morning, the Committee of MPs, in support of James Patrick. That's the Metropolitan Police constable who gave evidence recently. Chris Hobbs served between 1978 and 2011. Also with us, Commander Adrian Hanstock, who is the Metropolitan Police's commander in charge of crime and criminal justice. Welcome, both of you. Commander Hanstock, do you accept that this is going on?
Good morning, Victoria. No, I don't. As you'd expect me to say, integrity is at the heart of everything we do, and the direction to all our staff is that they must do everything correctly and within Home Office guidelines. It's absolutely important to state that victims are at the heart of everything we do, and if that's not the case, we may as well shut up shop now. But what I would want to say is around this whole issue of assessment of crime as it's reported to us, there's two elements to it. The first of those is that we must make an assessment of what's being told to us to identify opportunities to investigate and find further evidence that would support that victim receiving justice for what has happened. The second aspect of this is then categorising those offences for statistical monitoring, of course, but also for planned policing purposes, so that we can examine trends, we can introduce predictive policing models and target those areas of risk and harm and make sure that we do everything we can to bring crime down, as indeed the public would expect of us.
Why are you reviewing then the way rape and sexual offences have been recorded over the last couple of years if there's no problem?
Well, I mean, this is always such a contentious area for society. Any degree of pernicious offences, be it sexual offences, hate crimes, it's absolutely important that we look at what's happening there. What we are seeing, and I think again it's important to note that some of the issues that are being raised are based on activities perhaps from 2 years ago or more, where things might not have been quite as tight as they are now. If we just look at rape as an example, we're recording more offences and allegations of rape than ever before. It's increased by 30% in the last year alone. And those allegations never change. Whatever a victim reports to us always remains in that state on our systems. It's only when we then do that further detailed examination and investigation that can sometimes change the circumstances as they were reported. What I think is important to state is the suggestion that there's this no crime or no crime has taken place. That on occasions is true. But before we would change our recording to show that no crime has taken place, we need to be absolutely crystal clear that there is independent, verifiable evidence to suggest that's the case. Maybe I can give you an example. So a victim might report a certain set of circumstances has happened. Our investigators, who are specially trained, can then on occasion demonstrate through CCTV footage or proof that an offender was actually not even in that location, that it's impossible for the crime to have taken place as recorded. I think in those circumstances, absolutely legitimate to show that no crime took place.
So when James Patrick, your officer, your constable, gives evidence to MPs on oath saying this: burglary is an area where crimes are downgraded or moved into other brackets, such as criminal damage for attempted burglaries or other types of thefts.
Well, classification is a complex business. You may be aware there's 1,600. There's over 1,600 different categories that crime can be assessed as, and
so it would be normal for 300 burglaries, as he put it, to disappear within a couple of days.
Well, circumstances can change, and as facts become known, the situation, as reported, can alter. But it works both ways. So, for example, somebody reporting damage to the lock on their shed may be recorded initially as criminal damage, but once we understand the circumstance of that, it's often the case that that's upgraded to an attempted burglary. So classification moves both ways in offending. The point I would want to stress, though, is there is no direction and no leadership direction from the Met that there should be fudging of these figures. And if you just stick on that example you raised around burglary, if there was simply a manoeuvring of crime from one type to another, we would expect to see an increase in the category it's moved into. In London at the moment, burglary is down 6%, but similarly criminal damage is down 11%. So that would tend to suggest that there's no routinely shifting categories simply to make a particular crime type appear more, so we're more effective in that area.
Can I ask you why James Patrick is now subject to a gross misconduct hearing?
Well, it's probably improper of me to talk about the circumstances of that, and I'm actually not involved in that investigation. It's down to other branches of the service to look at the circumstances, and all I can say, it's not related to the circumstances he's raised with the Public Accounts Committee.
So it's nothing to do with what he said to them in terms of massaging the figures?
No.
That's an extraordinary coincidence then, isn't it?
Well, as I say, it's improper of me to talk about those circumstances, and I'm sure the circumstance and the facts will be reported in due course.
Well, he's told us, James Patrick has given a statement to us, following my appearance at the Public Administration Select Committee, I've been served a notice. I have been served a notice after his appearance by the Commander of the Directorate of Professional Standards to the effect that I may be subject to more discipline if I discuss the matters raised any further, in particular with any journalists.
Well, I think, in any circumstance for an organisation like ours, we need to be accurate in what is being reported into the public domain so that there is no sense that we are undermining that confidence unduly. And I think all that's being suggested here is that any officer in the service needs to recognise the protocols and controls that authorise the release of data. But as I say, I'm not involved in PC Patrick's restrictions or any discipline activity there, so I can't really comment with any degree of certainty as to what the background to that is.
OK, let me bring in Norman Baker, Crime Prevention Minister. Good morning to you. I know you've been listening to some of our conversation. Two areas, really. First of all, how do you react to allegations that the crime figures are being massaged? And you've just heard Commander Hanstock's defence of what's going on. He doesn't accept it at all. What do you say?
I don't see any evidence that they're being massaged. There may have been some massaging in the past when we had centrally derived targets, which the last government introduced, which then did create incentives to not record crime properly, but they were abolished when the coalition government took office, and therefore there's no incentive, I think, to massage figures. And we measure crime in two different ways. We measure it through the official statistics, which of course are now independent because the Office of National Statistics is independent of the Home Office, and we also measure it through the crime survey, and both of those show crime declining year on year. And as you just heard there, the burglary and the criminal damage case demonstrates that the shifting isn't occurring.
So you say that listeners, taxpayers, can believe the crime figures when they are published?
Yes, I don't see why they shouldn't. I mean, as I say, there are two measures of crime. Both of them are independent of the Home Office, and both of them show crime declining. There are particular offences where crime is increasing, for example, theft against a person, which may be down to theft of mobile phones and the like. And there's also an increase in some sexual offences because people are being encouraged to come forward and report those. But overall, the picture is pretty clear across the country, and the official statistics are corroborated by the crime survey by and large.
What do you make of James Patrick's evidence then?
Well, it's not for me to talk about individual police officers and
no, but you must have a view. He gave public evidence to the Public Administration Committee.
Well, I believe that that's an operational matter for the police in terms of how they're dealing with him. But
no, I'm not. No, I mean, I'm asking you about what he said to your colleagues.
Well,
I've
indicated to you I don't believe there is massaging of crime figures. That's the view I've taken.
So what do you think he's saying then?
Well, you'll have to ask him what he's saying. But what we are having, of course, is the HMIC are reviewing the integrity of crime recording just to make sure. They will report publicly in autumn 2014. They work continually with police forces to ensure crime recording is as accurate as possible, and there are strong safeguards. I hope your listeners will be reassured in place to ensure police recorded crime is accurate. There are clear rules that govern crime recording, and each force has a crime registrar who will arbitrate on crime recording. And the Independent Office of National Statistics has recognised the quality of crime recording by the police remains among the best in the world. So,
and they also said in January this year the fall in crime may have been exaggerated.
Well, I don't think, as I say, there are two separate measures of crime, and they both show crime going down. So
yes, and I'm telling you that the ONS, which you've just quoted to me in January this year, suggested that the fall in crime may have been exaggerated.
Well, I had to just look at if there were only one source of crime, then I would take that seriously. But if there are two sources in crime, both of which demonstrate crime is going down, that appears to me to provide independent corroboration. We're talking about thousands of people who've responded to the crime survey. But in any case, as I say, HMIC are looking at crime reporting, just to be on the safe side, and they will report back in autumn 2014. Let me be quite clear. From the government's point of view, and indeed I would say from the police's point of view, there is no incentive in having anything other than accurate figures. And if any police officer were in any way skewing the figures, that would be a serious disciplinary matter.
So let me put this to you. Cuffing, when officers record multiple incidents in the same area as a single crime. Do you think that doesn't happen?
I've no evidence that it is happening. And as I say, there's no incentive for police officers to do anything other than record crime accurately. They may have been in the past when there were centrally driven targets. There is no incentive to do that now. Let
me bring in Chris Hogg then, who's a former Metropolitan officer between 1978 and 2011. Chris Hobbs, I beg your pardon. Tell us what you found. What examples can you give us?
Well, I've listened to sort of a growing sense of disbelief on what's just being said, and of course it should be James Patrick that should be sitting here and not me.
Well, he's not allowed to talk to us, or he may lose his job.
Absolutely, and that really is a number of the problem, isn't it, with crime figures? I've been talking to police officers since I knew I was coming on your programme, and obviously I'm in a unique position because police officers will talk to me. They're not allowed to talk to the press, and they don't trust the senior management. And there is no doubt that there remains the same problem that we used to see when I joined in 1978. The business about attempted burglaries being reported as criminal damage, pickpocketing being reported as property lost in the street. And we've also got an issue now with street robbery. And in terms of the reassuring words of Mr. Hanstock, who I know and who I have a lot of respect for, but in terms of sexual offences, there's about another bombshell about to hit the Met by a journalist who's got some information under the Freedom of Information Act. So there is a major problem. Police officers are frightened to speak out because there is a culture of repression of whistleblowers, as is the case with James Patrick. I've just been talking to an officer that deals with street robberies. Now, he's no doubt at all that officers, when they go to a robbery, are encouraged, when they're submitting a crime report, to report it as anything but a robbery. Theft person, theft and assault. I witnessed one of these myself less than a year ago in a shop just up the road in Ealing. However, amazingly, if they actually arrest someone as a result of a theft person or snatch, then that is recorded as a robbery clear-up. So here we have, yes, if someone's arrested, it's a robbery. If someone isn't arrested, the suspect's not detained, it goes down as a theft or a theft person. Now, that's just one example of the way figures are skewed. Mr. Hanstock must be well aware, he joined the force some time ago, that this manipulation in terms of attempted burglaries, pickpocketing and so on, that was going on. It's been going on for decades. It's possibly worse now than it was then, but it's been going on for decades. He must have experienced that as a lowly PC. I certainly experienced it as a probationer. So there is a problem, and the real problem, the Minister talks about no incentive to massage crime. Within the Met at the moment, there is a wire-type culture where senior officers from the Met, ACPO-ranked officers, will go around to police stations, interrogate chief superintendents, sometimes literally reducing them to tears, and move them if they can't come up with the sort of performance that's expected. And that culture permutates down the ranks, right the way down to the detective chief inspectors, the detective inspectors, down to the PCs. So people will do everything, obviously, to retain their jobs and retain their positions. So some of the remarks that have been made, as I say, I have a lot of respect for Mr Hanstock, but are very disingenuous and are really just towing the party line.
Can I read some text messages from listeners, Commander Hanstock? Let me have a look at these. Police spending crime statistics, this is not new. I've been involved in policing for over 30 years. It's gone on for that entire time and still is now. For example, if an offender steals 3, 4 or 5 times on one day from a shop, but at different times, it's classed as one offence and not 5. According to Home Office counting rules, this is a continuing offence. It's a farce. The figures are bent continually. Another listener says they took sex offences from CID to a specialist department, under-resourced and needed to show that they were successful. Fewer allegations accepted as rape, sending the investigations back to the borough. I'm a serving police constable, says another one. We all know the figures are massaged. Robbery will be reclassified as common assault and theft so as not to show up as violent crime. Multiple thefts reported at the same time will be recorded as one theft. It goes on every day. I'm not willing to go on air, I'm afraid, much as I'd love to.
Well, there are a number of issues that are raised from that whole discussion. Let me start with the integrity matter again, and that's where I started at the start of this conversation. It's absolutely incumbent on individual officers to demonstrate the integrity of their oath of office. And if they feel that they are being persuaded, guided, led, instructed to behave in a way that is not ethical, they have a responsibility to report it, and our whistleblowing processes allow that to take place. With regard to this concept of continuing offence, that was an interpretation of crime recording rules some time ago, but our position for a number of years now has been very clear: one victim, one crime. Whoever is the victim, whether it's an organisation, a shop or an individual, even if it has been a number of different offences in a short period of time, there will be a crime recorded for each individual victim, which will demonstrate the range and the volume of that offending to allow us to take proactive policing action as we described. The final point that was coming out there was, again, this suggestion of the massaging, the movement of crimes into different categories and final charging decisions reflecting what had taken place and that not being accurate. Well, again, I described crime can change all the time based on further evidence coming to light, more witnesses providing detail, and a more comprehensive assessment of what has actually happened in a set of circumstances that results then in an interpretation. And of course, that is always going to be subjective. The Minister said that, HMIC and others are checking us repeatedly to see if we're getting this right. And in the Met, I chair a monthly scrutiny panel that assesses all of our crime types. The crime registrar, who's been in place now for 11 years in London, is as independent as we can have, and he monitors compliance with the counting rules. From my chairing of this regular scrutiny panel to look at those, our assessments based on the HMIC approach tell us that we're 96% correct in our recording and interpretation of what victims have told us, what they've reported at the time of first contacting us, in how it's then finally categorised and returned to the Home Office as our interpretation of that matter.
Okay. Thank you for coming on the programme. Commander Adrian Hanstock from the Metropolitan Police in charge of crime and criminal justice. Chris Hobbs, former Met officer, who provided written evidence to the Public Administration Committee in support of the Met's PC James Patrick, and Norman Baker, you heard from, Crime Prevention Minister.